Hi, everyone. Welcome to Data Ethics Professional Webinar number 10. Our topic today is advertising and ethics with Jayne Streets. So she is joining us to talk about all the data that is used to profile people for advertising and how this can be done ethically, or the way that you can sort of consider this from an ethical lens. So thank you so much, Lara, for joining us. We're really excited to have you here.
Hi, glad to be here. Thanks, everyone.
Where are you joining us from?
So I live just outside London in Surrey, near Woking. So I commute into the office a couple of times a week into central London, near London Bridge. But yeah, at the moment I'm at home in kind of grey Surrey.
Same. It's gray here in Teesside as well.
Yeah.
So, uh, for all of those joining, we would love it if you would introduce yourselves in the chat. This is obviously one of our most favorite things to see who's joined us today. So, if you want to tell us sort of your role and where you've joined us from today, we'd love to see. We're going to give people just a couple more minutes to trickle in because I can see that we're getting a few more still coming in. So just if you want to go on to the next slide, Laura, I'll just sort of do a little bit of housekeeping while we see who's joining us. So we'll start in a few minutes. Like I said, let us know who you are, where you're from, what organization you work for, what your role is, anything you're wanting to share. We love to see who comes. Um, the when the webinar is going, we're not going to sort of interrupt with questions. We'll do questions at the end. The way we normally do it is Laura will talk for about 20-25 minutes. If any questions occur to you during that time, please feel free to put your questions either in the webinar chat where you're introducing yourself now, or if you'd prefer to ask anonymously, we have a Q&A box as well, so you can put something in there. I'll be keeping an eye on both of those, and we'll I'll sort of curate those questions when we get to the end of the chat. Oh, I'm just looking at where everyone's coming from today. I see some familiar names. Remy, it's lovely to see you. He's one of our data ethics professionals.
Oh yeah.
Um, was Remy on your group, Laura, or a different one?
No, I don't think so. I don't recognize Remy's name.
Ah, well, 15 years in advertising, so
Oh,
I love some good questions.
hi,
I'm
Remy.
seeing it's lovely to see this today that we've got a lot of people um, coming from industry. A lot of times, we do get like part of our audience in the ODI is public sector, obviously, but I think this is probably the kind of thing that, sort of a lot of industry people really think about a lot. Not that, obviously, third sector do a lot of advertising as well. So
Mhm.
it's great. We're really excited to see you all here. And of course, we are all, I mean, if you're if you're online in any way, being profiled in these ways, probably. So super relevant to everyone, really, to hear how data about you might be used. Right. So what time is it? We're 3 minutes past. I think it's probably a good time to start, but let me just go through the rest of our sort of opening points first. The slides and the recording will be shared after the event. We've asked, please, can you turn off any AI note takers? They're not in our meeting. Laura was having a chat with us about that beforehand. And, just to emphasize the point, really, that it's better to get consent for these things. I don't know if you want to have that sort of add to that at all, Laura.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's I don't have anything against AI note takers per se, but I think that we at least in my industry, we have kind of fallen into this habit of using them a lot without asking the people who are taking part if it's okay. So I like to throw it in. I like to say no to them just as a reminder that you can say no to them. It's a matter of consent. So yeah, that's why that's there.
Brilliant. That's an excellent reminder for all of us, I think. And we do have a QR code here if you'd like to join our mailing list for updates about future webinars. They're always free. And we are going to have some exciting new data ethics things that will be starting this year. So our aim is to start a book club that we might do either semi-annually or quarterly, where we sort of have a book to read and then discuss, hopefully with the author. So that might be another thing you'll get an update on when we managed to get it off the ground. Also, if you are a certified data ethics professional, we are going to start a community of practice group that is going to meet informally on a monthly basis, probably the alternate sort of fortnight from when our webinars are. So this community of practice will be just for people who've certified as data ethics professionals to discuss data ethics issues, continue to network, share ideas and good practice, raise any interesting questions of like things they've seen in the news, that kind of thing. So if you are a certified data ethics professional, you'll get the updates about that too if you join our mailing list. Obviously, if you're not, we won't be spamming you with things irrelevant to you. We try and keep it just to the data ethics stuff here if you'd like to subscribe for those updates. Right, without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Lara. So, Lara is a social advertising specialist with 12 years of experience planning and buying ads across a wide range of social and search platforms. She's currently the head of biddable operations at MGOMD, where she works with a team of media planners and buyers to optimize working processes and to ensure that campaign delivery is best in class. She recently graduated with a master's in epistemology, ethics, and mind, focused on the moral questions concerning AI and digital advertising. So she is so well placed to talk about this topic today. We're really excited to hear her expertise on this. Just to introduce myself briefly, my name is Kay Achenbach. I work for the ODI. I am senior learning specialist and head of data ethics. So I run most of the data ethics training and also do some data ethics consultancy if your organization is looking to do something sort of more focused. So that's who you've got here with you today. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Laura.
Great, thank you, Kay. I'm so excited to be here today and present to all of you. So thank you for having me. Um, Kay has already given me a little introduction, but I'll give you a little bit more background, a bit more context about me. So I'm Laura Jane Streets. My pronouns are she and they, and I'm the head of biddable operations at MGOMD. And here's my email address. If anyone wants to reach out, it's lstreets@omc.com. And unless you work in this industry, you may not know what biddable operations is. So I thought I better actually explain what I'm the head of. So biddable is one type of buying methodology in digital advertising. So you might have heard of ad auctions. It's the way that companies like Google and Meta, TikTok, and a whole bunch of others decide which ad to show to which person at any given moment. So when you load your Instagram feed, there'll be tons of ads that you might see because there'll be loads of advertisers all bidding in that space. And it all depends on kind of your characteristics versus what the advertiser has chosen to target. So the ad that you end up seeing is essentially the ad that has won that particular auction that happens in like a split second. And how that's calculated is different for each platform slightly, but it's something like the bid, so the amount that they're willing to spend, versus your estimated action rate, so how likely you are to do something with the ad. And then ad quality and relevance is also going to play a part in it. So, you know, how good the platform thinks that your creative is or whatever. So hopefully that gives you a bit more context for what it is I'm actually doing. I'm basically working with the teams who work with those platforms to make sure that we're doing it in the best possible way and that we're paying our bills also. So I spent a bit more about me. I spent the first 10 years of my career in media as a paid social specialist, so working loads with Meta, Snapchat, TikTok, etc. But I also have experience in the paid search space, so primarily Google, but also Microsoft. Other things about me on this slide, obviously I'm an ODI data ethics professional. I'm very proud of that. I'm an advocate for diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And I'm also a strategic advisor at an advisory group called Advertising, who advise advertisers on how best to interact with LGBTQIA plus audiences. And this diagram on the right visualizes the way that I approach my work and the different kind of elements that make up how I function. So I'm foundationally rooted in concepts from philosophical ethics, so primarily virtue ethics, ethical frameworks around human rights and social justice. And then that feeds into how I approach access and inclusion, both within the workplace, but also in terms of the audiences that we support. And with all of that kind of backing up the understanding of the digital advertising ecosystem that I've worked in for the last 13 years. So that kind of sums up me. And the first thing I wanted to just kind of remind us on, I'm sure I'm just preaching to the choir here a little bit, but just a reminder of the difference between the law and ethics, because we're going to touch on this a little bit more. But ethics are the moral principles that guide us, right and wrong, based on personal and societal values, while law is a formal government-enforced system of rules for society with consequences like fines or jail for breaking them. They differ in enforcement and scope and flexibility. Something can be legal but unethical, e.g., you might think of some business practices that we could point to, or ethical but illegal, for example, civil disobedience. Law focuses on mandatory compliance for order, and ethics on ideal conduct for integrity, which is a personal thing. There is crossover in that law does obviously tend to reflect societal norms and is informed by ethics, but they are two separate things. And when we talk about the ethics of advertising, we often think of undesirable practices, which tend to be covered by law with legislation and regulation. So just touching on some of that, I'm not going to talk loads about law. I'm not a legal expert. I'm just putting this out here because this is what we have in place for advertising at the moment. So when we're thinking about regulation, there's various legislation in place protecting consumers from misrepresentation. Got Digital Markets Act, Competition Act, Consumers Act, the Online Safety Act, most recently. All of these different things all impact digital advertising. And then in terms of how it's regulated, we've got the ASA, we've got CAP and BCAP, and then one that we hear about quite a lot is Ofcom. So when something goes wrong with advertising and you feel like something's been misrepresented or you've been missold, you can contact one of these organizations for enforcement. And consumers can report these instances, and the advisory bodies will enforce fines through trading standards. So there are some expectations about advertising that I think we would universally agree are true. So I haven't written them all out here, but there's a few. So misrepresentation of a product or service, you expect that what you see in the ad is what you're going to receive. Fairness, so that the product is available to everyone at the same price, or that if there's a deal or something, it's available to anyone that sees that. And then age appropriateness, so protections for children relating to alcohol, violence, that kind of thing. We do expect as a society that we can rely on our advertisers to not be inappropriate in that sense. But there are limitations to regulation. So the first is that it's always retrospective. So you can't unsee an ad that the cat's already out of the bag. The child has already seen the vodka ad. It's too late, it's happened. It's good that there are steps that we can take after the fact, but the harm is done. Second is that regulation relies on scale. So a good example of this is that whenever we hear about a controversial moment on TV or a controversial ad, you'll always hear news reporters saying that the show received over 1,000 complaints to Ofcom or something. It's all related to scale, and the enforcement almost relies on there being scale. It's proportionate. And the third limitation is that it relies on access. So it's easy to view a poster outside a train station and say, oh, okay, well, that's offensive to me. For some reason, I'm going to report it. And then someone from the governing body can go out and have a look and say, oh, yes, that is offensive. I shall write this up. We shall do enforcement. But that's not the nature of how digital ads work. The, the placements are fleeting. You might see it once and not be able to replicate it. And it might be that you feel like you're the only person who's seen it because you saw it on your device. So, how do you even know if anyone else has seen it? Which brings us on to regulating the black box. So, there are issues. There are issues with trying to regulate. When I say the black box, I mean algorithmic delivery. So, digital delivery that is opaque to the people who aren't experiencing it. So automated delivery products. If you work in advertising, you'll know some of these products. If not, I'll do my best to try and explain them quickly. But automated delivery products such as Advantage Plus in Meta and Performance Max in Google mean that advertisers no longer select their audiences manually. So with these products, what the platforms are asking us to do is instead of selecting the audience that we want to deliver to, we let the platform optimize to whichever audience they think, well, not they think, but whichever audience the algorithm says is the most likely to convert and do whatever the action is that we want them to do. But the problem there is that we have no idea who we're actually targeting. And then on top of that, Gen AI creative solutions would mean that in some scenarios, no two users will see the same variation of an ad. Placements are fleeting and not reproducible, and advertisers are not approving each ad variation individually. And what this leads to is layers and layers of abstraction of accountability, because the advertiser doesn't know what creative has been seen, they don't know who saw it, they don't know where they saw it. It just goes out into the ether. And how do we hold anyone accountable for that? Who's responsible for it? So, what should we do? So, I'm proposing an ethics by design approach for advertisers, and we're going to talk about what that looks like. So, what is ethics by design? So this is a report from the World Economic Forum 2020. It's available online. There's a link in here to share around afterwards. It promotes an organizational approach that, quote, focuses on the environment that can lead ordinary people to engage in more ethical behaviors. So instead of relying on individuals to kind of do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, ethics by design is about creating a environment within your organization that kind of perpetuates a culture of psychological safety and enables people to speak up and be critical of things and be a bit more thoughtful about how they're approaching their day-to-day work. And this is not specific to advertising. This is like any organization can do this. But it does rely on a top-down approach. Like it really does have to be sold in throughout the organization. So applying ethics by design to advertising, what that looks like. I think the best way for me to demonstrate the need for this, or like what this might help us with, is to look at a couple of case studies where advertising maybe has gone a little bit awry. It hasn't broken any laws per se, but it might raise ethical questions for us. So the first case study I have is about first case study I have is about on-site signals and how advertisers use on-site signals to build audience segments. So In this particular case study, it's for a department store, and they've decided that they've run the numbers and they've looked at the analytics, and they've discovered that expectant parents are a really highly profitable segment. Now, obviously, expectant parents, that again is a dynamic segment. Those people are only part of that segment until the baby arrives. So it's not a it's a flexible, fluid kind of audience that we're talking about here. Those people aren't going to be expectant parents forever. Um, we want them to buy from us and not a competitor. And what they discovered was they need to reach these people before they start actually buying their baby stuff. We need to reach if we're only speaking to them once they've started buying the stuff, it's kind of too late. The work has been done. So how can we reach expectant parents before they start actually actively purchasing? And they came up with a solution to identify data signals that these newly expectant parents are most likely to exhibit prior to purchase. So, they're looking a little bit kind of further ahead and thinking, okay, well, before these expectant parents start buying stuff, what are the signals that they're giving us that we can pick up on from their website? And we're going to target them with relevant messaging through online and postal ads. Right, makes perfect sense. There's no issue here. There's no ethical quandary around targeting pregnant people with ads. You're allowed to do that. That's fine. Now, this case study is quite old, so I'm really sorry if I'm showing you something that you've seen like 100 times. But this was the outcome of this particular strategy, as covered by Forbes magazine in 2012. How Target figured out a teen girl was pregnant before her father did. So what Target ended up successfully doing was accidentally creating a predictive surveillance system that then outed pregnant people to the people around them. Now, of course, that was absolutely not the intention. That would be wild if that was the intention. All they wanted to do was sell some baby stuff. They just did not foresee that their algorithm would actually work so well that it would have this outcome. So this is my first case study, thinking about, nothing illegal happened here. They weren't going out of their way to do anything nefarious, but the outcomes of this were still really negative for people who, in particular, children that are pregnant do not need this kind of outing. So this is one example. I'm going to go on to another example. This one's obviously using on-site signals. So this is what we call first-party data. It's owned by Target. The other, and there's lots of ways to target, but another way to target using digital advertising is something called interest targeting, which is third-party data, which comes from the social platforms themselves. So if you think about if you log into Facebook or Instagram and you're scrolling your feed, you're telling the platform what you're interested in. So then you go into the bucket that says you're interested in football or you're interested in high street fashion, etc. And then advertisers can use that interest data to target you with their products. So in this example, it's from the UK government. So going into the public sector. So the rationale is that the UK government have done some research and they've found some data that suggests that young people of West Indian descent living in the UK are not accessing benefits that they're eligible to receive. Okay, so the objective of the campaign is to drive awareness amongst this audience so that they can access benefits that they are entitled to. Again, no problem with any of that. That sounds pretty good. So what's the solution here? It's a little bit more difficult because race and ethnicity are protected characteristics. It's not something you can't log. You'll be pleased to hear you can't log into Meta and just type in an ethnicity and it will start targeting those people, because that data is not collected, and no, people don't offer that data to the platforms. So they can't just do that. They can't just type in West Indian 18 plus. So instead, in this kind of scenario, we'd use interest and behavioral targeting to build an audience segment that most effectively meets the criteria. And this is absolutely standard behavior in the ad industry. It's what we do every day. We work out how best to reach people using other signals that we have access to, which can be from a whole range of sources, purchase data that we might have access to, anything like that. In most cases, it's not a cut and dry, here's the first party data, here's a list of people I want to target. It doesn't often work that way. So essentially what we do is create this audience segment based off proxy data. So we think, okay, if we want to target, we're selling bleach and we want to target people who own homes and are likely to be cleaning their homes. You go through a process of analysis and you build out those various data points to see what signals are the most likely to meet that audience. Absolutely standard. And what happened? Well, we got this delightful coverage from The Guardian. What happened here was that the audience segmentation was not very thoughtfully done. It was based on stereotypes. You can see here it says stereotypes about interests and traits such as music taste and hair type were also widely used. Now, again, there's nothing wrong necessarily with building out audiences in this way, but when it's the UK government and we're trying to do this in the most ethical way possible, this is just a bit of a blunt kind of tool that's been used here. It's not ideal. So hopefully that gives you some idea of the kind of impacts that can happen as the result of advertising not being the most thoughtful ethically. But what's the impact for the advertiser in these scenarios? So it's threefold. There's reputational damage when a brand acts in a way that goes against their values that they have expressed in the past. Consumers and partners are going to lose faith in their mission. They're not going to trust them because they haven't reflected. They've said one thing and they've done another. Basically, that's reputationally not great. There's also legal issues. So we've talked about how ethics and compliance or legislation aren't the same thing. But if harm has been caused, then there's a chance that there's a legal battle coming their way as well. And commercial impact. Consumers and partners will turn to competitors, either in the short or the long term. So thinking about ethics by design in practice and strategies for being more ethical and more critical and more thoughtful. Like I said before, ethics by design does rely on it being an organizational approach. So some of these tactics that I'm about to show you, they will work in isolation, and it is good for us as individuals to think about. But for ethics by design to be truly functional, it does have to be an organizational approach. So it does require that the most senior stakeholders in the business are bought in. But with that in mind, here are some strategies. So the first is to centralize meaningful inclusivity. So thinking about that last example with the UK government, interrogate the decision making. When you're building that audience segment, are you the right person to be saying, what West Indian young men in the UK are interested in? If you're not that person, then maybe consider other resources that you can tap into. Thinking about, is the audience represented throughout the media planning process? So making sure that the right people are in the room, again, from top to bottom throughout the process. And also thinking about how it could go wrong. So I'll talk a little bit more about consequence scanning in a second, but that's also consequence scanning. There are resources that you can tap into to improve the authenticity of the work and potentially mitigate harm. So I've got just a handful here: consultancies, advisory organizations, cultural insights and research agencies, and also running your own focus groups. Like, consider doing some research in your organizations, making sure that you've definitely got those voices coming through in the work that you're doing. And obviously, I'm going to talk about advertising because I work with advertising. But they have an amazing advocacy playbook, which anyone online has access to, and will help you think of the best ways to activate within that queer audience. So please do look at the advocacy playbook from them. And then another thing that you can be thinking about, as well as that inclusive work, is adopting methods from systems thinking. So again, apologies if systems thinking might be like completely new to some people, but be old news for others. So sorry if I'm treading on any toes there. But systems thinking methodology comes from the discipline of engineering, and it's to do with mapping the various systems and stakeholders within a project or within an organization, and thinking about each of their individual objectives. And it's a really good way of identifying points of conflict where there may be misalignment, and there'll be conflicting objectives that might lead to negative outcomes. And I've popped this book on here, Thinking in Systems. It's really, really good. It's really helpful. And this diagram of the pig model, which I've taken from the UCL Centre for Systems Engineering, it just kind of demonstrates that thinking, that way of stakeholder mapping and thinking about subjectivity, how each of the stakeholders in that system are thinking about what they want the project to achieve. And with the pig model, you see everyone thinks that the pig is there for a different reason. So some people are going to be sad about what happens to the pig in that scenario. And then I've already touched on it, but consequence scanning and risk management. So of course, I've put the ODI resources in here, just a little plug for them. But they have this consequence and risk evaluation tool, the CARE tool, which I think some of you have access to. I don't want to promise that you all have access to it. I'll leave Kay to talk about that. But essentially, you don't need these tools. You can do this yourself. You don't need the online tools. But as long as you're asking, what are the intended and unintended consequences of this product or feature or campaign? What are the positive consequences that we want to focus on? And what are the consequences that we want to mitigate? And at the end of the day, you don't need fancy tools to do this. You just need to make the time during that campaign planning to sit down with a relevant group of people and go through this and make sure that you haven't missed anything. So, in summary, the unexpected and unintended outcomes of audience profiling are coalescing as technology develops. Making sure that individuals and communities aren't unfairly discriminated against, particularly in relation to access to healthcare, financial services, and education. So yeah, it's worth noting that, of course, there are different levels of risk if I'm selling rubber ducks to if I'm trying to get people to sign up for organ donation services, like, obviously. but I think that we that both require care and consideration. Algorithmic delivery systems reinforce existing trends and biases, naturally restricting delivery to any novel audiences. So the same people who have already engaged with your product are going to be the ones that you keep showing your product. Proxy data points can act as modes of surveillance, as we saw in the target example. So just being mindful of that. Increasing pressure to maximize the use of AI products, less human interrogation at each stage, thinking about those AI products that the platforms are pushing on us and continue to develop. But there are steps you can take to mitigate potential harms through an ethics by design systems thinking approach. And I've got a little reading list for you since Kay mentioned the book club. Some of these are newer, some of these are older. Disabling Intelligences is the book that I'm reading at the moment by Rua M. Williams, which is fantastic so far. I also love Against Techno-Ableism by Ashley Fu. Algorithms of Oppression is a slightly older book. It's pre-AI, so it talks about search algorithms without thinking about the AI side of things. So it's quite interesting to read that one now that we do have the AI search results. And Queer Data by Kevin Guyan as well is also amazing. And I'm hoping to work with him with advertising as well. So yeah, here are some books that you should definitely check out. And that's it. And this QR code takes you to my LinkedIn page so that you can connect with me on LinkedIn if you would like. Or if anyone would like to discuss any of this any further, I'm aware that trying to cover ethics and digital advertising in like 15 minutes is basically impossible. So there's lots more that we could talk about. So yeah, please get in touch.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Laura. That was really, really fascinating. I've got my list of questions here that I've been keeping as you've been talking. So I'll start with some of those. Everyone else, please feel free to put any questions that you have or observations or comments in the chat. We always love, I could see that some people were sharing some links. So thank you so much for that. We love when people do that. Please feel free to do that while we talk. So I will start us off. I wanted to pick up the point about the CARE tool and the data ethics canvas just before I forget.
Mhm.
The CARE tool is basically an online framework that guides people through the consequence scanning. It has the facility to use AI to help you brainstorm consequences. So, because of that, it obviously costs us a little bit to run.
Right.
So everybody gets one free go of it. It was funded by DSIT, the Department of Science, Innovation, and Technology, because they felt that it was really important to facilitate, consequence scanning for any kind of data project. So because of that, everybody can have one free assessment of a project. If you want to do more than one project, we ask that you get ODI membership. So I know Joe is in the background here facilitating the webinar. Thanks to Joe, and she'll be able to tell you a little more about membership if you think that you want to use the CARE tool regularly. We do have next month's webinar is with an organization called Global Fishing Watch that's going to talk about how they embedded data ethics in their workflows. They have, all of their projects are sort of tech and AI and data related. So they and they have a lot of really interesting use cases that, need an ethical assessment. So they're going to talk about how they did that. And that'll give you more insight into the CARE tool if anybody wants more on that. The Data Ethics Canvas is a free resource on our website. Anybody can use that as many times as they want because it's essentially a PDF that prompts you with questions about not only the consequence scanning aspect that the CARE tool would do, but it sort of goes a little bit broader. So it looks at things like, are you communicating with the people that are affected by this project? What data are you sharing with others? It sort of has a broader scope. So it's the kind of thing that you'd invest time in if you were the project's definitely going ahead. The CARE tool is the kind of thing you might do if you're like, should we even be doing this? Let's have a think about whether we want to do this before we invest a lot of money and then would have to like pull it. So hopefully that gives everyone just a little bit of insight into that. So I'm just gonna pick up on some of these questions in the chat now. Um, So actually, I see Remy asked a question that sort of aligns with one I had, which I was going to start with. So he said, a very important point you mentioned was the black box for optimizers when it comes to adapt creative things to audiences without human intervention. What guardrails do you use? That was sort of aligned to a question I had. So, for example, with your um, the example that you gave of the UK government targeting West Indian young people.
Hmm.
Um, I noticed as I was sort of like scanning the screenshot of the news article, it said something in there like they appealed for they had an ad appealing for murder witnesses for people who like had liked hip hop. So they obviously somebody there thought, people who like hip hop know about murders. Somebody had that thought. So I guess like is there a guardrail somewhere that could be put in place? Would that have had to be the police? Would it have had to be the that sort of black box optimizer? How can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. So there's two questions there. One is about the creative and one is about the audience.
Mm,
Sounds like Remy was asking about creative.
mm,
So I'll do that one first. So with Black Box Creative, we actually don't. It's one of those things where we kind of talk about it a lot about generative AI and digital advertising. Actually, in my experience, it's not really happening. Like in Meta, for example, there are some generative tools where you can put, say, you put 10 images in and you put 10 headline sort of titles in, and then they say generative. They're just kind of trialing. It's kind of just a test. It's just an A/B test kind of methodology. Um, it's not able to generate anything truly novel. It's only using that input that you put in. So at the moment, I'm almost less concerned about generative AI ads because there is no functionality to just let the platform create whatever you like with your branding. Um, so yeah, we're not quite there yet with that, which I'm okay with. It can just stay exactly where it is as far as I'm concerned. Um, but I do have a feeling that that is coming. We know that the companies like Meta are investing a lot of money in AI and Gen AI solutions. So it's only a matter of time until they say to us, hey, why don't you just turn this toggle on and then we'll decide what the ad looks like. So I'm just kind of keeping my eye on that for now. And then with the audience targeting with the West Indian or the one that you mentioned, Kay, yeah, in that particular case, that wasn't a black box issue. That was just someone not engaging their brain cells to create that targeting segment. In Meta, you can log into something called the ad library. And also, if you just see an ad on Meta, you can click and see why you're seeing it. I don't know if everyone's done that, but you can. And it will tell you exactly why you were targeted. And what happened was someone logged in to that ad library and saw the ad for looking for witnesses of this murder and saw that the targeting was hip hop. I don't know, like someone made that choice. That wasn't a black box issue. If it was a black box issue, i.e., the algorithm was doing it, it would say something really like meaningless, like because you look like other people who liked this ad or something. Um, the fact that someone actually made that choice is obviously extremely concerning. But yeah, in this particular instance, that was a human issue, not a robot issue.
That's really interesting because that's one of the things that I always say about a lot of data ethics issues is a lot of times the software is functioning as intended. Like it doesn't have as many, like a lot of the problems, a lot of the negative outcomes that happen because of the human that has made a mistake or the organization that has failed to put something in place. I'm glad you realized Remy was asking about creative things. I didn't catch that. So yeah, that's good to know that they're not generating like random images all the time because you can imagine, the how that might quickly become a disaster. I had another question about the ad targeting actually, which was when you were talking about the expected parent,
Mm.
expectant parents. Um, and you said that you can't type into Meta um, something like, race because it's a protected characteristic or
Mhm.
ethnicity. How do they do that with pregnancy? Because that's a protected characteristic as well. Are they thinking like these are people who are interested in buying baby things? It might be the grandma of the baby. Is that sort of like the ethical sort of skirting around the regulation, that ethical choice?
Sure. Well, firstly, that example is from 2012 and also from the US. So
Mhm.
regulation's very different there anyway. But the big difference is that that was first party data versus third party data. So
Mm,
Target were just using signals from their website. They never typed into anything target pregnant people.
okay.
They did some analysis to work out that, based on whatever signals they had at the time, which on-site actions expectant parents were most likely to take. So they weren't, if you like, they weren't profiling exactly so much as just saying like, here are these three things. So I don't know, looking at buying a new sofa might be a signal that someone's an expectant parent because they might have been putting off buying a new sofa, but hey, now they're pregnant, sod it, I want to be comfortable, that sort of thing. So there's nothing about someone looking at sofas that necessarily says they're pregnant. But if they're also looking at buying a new car or I don't know, there's lots of it could honestly be anything. They might be looking at a certain type of cat food that it just turns out that there are these weird signals that all together Target decided, okay, that's what a expectant parent looks like. But they put that label on it. That label doesn't exist.
Mm.
I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, that is helpful. And it
Mhm.
definitely strikes me as one of these it definitely comes down to that Venn diagram of ethics and law where you know, you can find a way to do things
Mhm.
potentially that, yeah. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad because obviously if you are, I mean, I'm a parent and some of the things it obviously has me profiled as the parent of a young child
Mhm.
who doesn't want to have them have too much screen time or something like that. So it's always advertising like STEM toys and things to me, and they
Mhm.
are good. Like I want them. They are exactly what I want to buy my child. So it's not always bad. But I see that we've had some discussion in the chat now about the issue, of course, of what if you then miscarry and then the ads are, you're still being targeted by these ads, but they're very distressing to you because obviously you were hoping to buy the things and now don't need them.
Yeah,
And I don't know if you have any
that's
further thoughts on that.
yeah. Actually, I nearly included that in the slides, thinking about that is an unexpected outcome, and a similar issue for anyone who's ever worked on an alcohol brand is, well, guess who's gonna use your ads the most? It's people who have a problem with alcohol. There's no way to kind of exclude alcoholics if they don't want to be excluded. But at the end of the day, or gambling, ads for gambling everywhere, and some people are fine with it, but you're always going to end up hurting someone or empowering someone to do something dangerous to themselves. So yeah, miscarriage, alcohol, gambling, cigarettes, even, not that we see any ads for those nowadays, but vapes, maybe, who knows? Yeah. Then we're getting onto the which accounts do you want to work on if you work in an agency conversation.
Mm.
What do you feel okay with working on?
Excellent, excellent point. Oh, Joe's just reminded me, if you wouldn't mind just
Mm.
stopping sharing the slide deck because then they can see our faces.
Sorry,
Um,
do you want? Oh God, sorry, I forgot all this. Do you want to do this one?
oh, yes, I'll do this at the end if you want to pop it up at the end,
Okay.
we'll remind people of what's coming. So let me just ask a few more questions now because
Mhm.
we've had quite a few come in. So this is a really interesting question. If you could remove one commonly used data practice in digital advertising tomorrow on ethical grounds alone, what would it be?
Commonly used. I mean, to be honest, we've already touched on it. It's the stereotyping. It's the interest based stereotyping, and I think that what's happened is advertisers have gotten so used to having this absolute plethora of data points available to them on Meta and all the other platforms that we use them because they're there. But in the past, we don't get those options on TV. You just put an ad on TV in the spot that you want during Traitors, well, not during Traitors because that's BBC, during Love Island or whatever, and it's contextual. So vaguely the kind of people that watch Love Island, and you want to be in front of those people. Great. Um, with something like meta advertising, we have so many options for targeting that and we're so rushed a lot of the time to get live that people make silly decisions and they stereotype and they're not being thoughtful and they're not going through those inclusive practices to make sure that what they're doing isn't performative. So yeah, I think that's the big one for me is like if that disappeared overnight, we would still use those services. We would still use meta advertising because that's where people are, but having that wealth, that like library of interest information about people and behavioral stuff, I think is just kind of gone a step too far. I think.
That's really interesting. That actually leads right onto the next question, which is what does fake inclusion look like from a data perspective, fake inclusion in advertising? And are there red flags that tell you an inclusive campaign is just surface level representation, masking exclusionary targeting underneath?
Yeah, I mean that's hard. There are some really good examples of campaigns I can send over afterwards where you can tell that they're inclusive because of the language that's being used, that it's for that particular audience and it's speaking to them using their language. And I suppose, yes, you could look under the hood and maybe it's targeting hip hop. Who knows? Um, all we can do is as practitioners is try and make sure that we have ticked every box to make sure that that doesn't happen. As audiences, you can do as much research as you can do, but we just have to hope that that's not the case and that the right people are in place. And it's just that critical engagement with it, where it's like we should be asking that question. If we see an ad on TV or something and we think, oh wow, that seems really inclusive, maybe let's have a look and check that it actually is inclusive and that it isn't just someone ticking a box. So I think like holding ourselves to account is probably the answer.
Mm. I would have thought to your point that you made earlier about are you the best person to decide what
Well,
this looks like is such a
yeah,
good one as well,
yeah,
because you might think that you're being inclusive, but if it's coming from, sort of the perspective of, a middle-aged white person making a decision about a young West Indian person,
mhm.
your inclusivity might fall short of the mark.
Yeah. So there's definitely some humility that we could all exercise a bit more to say, no, this isn't what I should be talking about or targeting.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to read another question from Andy in the chat. He says, I work in the co-op as part of risk and governance. Can you suggest any simple ways of working that could be put in place to detect, challenge, and correct unintended consequences of data use and support better, faster decision making?
I would say you're trying to do quite a lot there, because you're trying to do it all very quickly. And it doesn't always work that way. You might have to make a bit more space in your processes. But I completely appreciate, you know, as someone who works in social media, we're expected to be able to turn stuff around like same day. And that's where we get a lot of these issues where, people make really silly decisions with stereotyping interests because the client wants it live now. We have to sell their pizzas or whatever. I don't have a pizza client. Don't worry. I'm not speaking about anyone in particular. But I think working it in, I also work in operations and I talk a lot about how long everything actually takes and being realistic about how long things take. And if there needs to be a step that takes an extra day or two to make sure that you have done the consequence scanning and the risk assessment, so consequence scanning is what you're going to need to put into your processes, but you can create like a framework table and just work through it. Make sure you're if you don't have the right people in the room, try and take that step back and be a bit more objective and think like, well, how is this going to go down with other audiences? Am I the only person who needs to approve of this, or who else can I get involved? But yeah, I'm sorry there isn't an easy answer for how to do this quickly.
I would add to that's sort of what the care tool is for, but I want to echo what Laura said that it does need to be often more than one person if it's going to be a very risky project because a lot of times you don't know what you don't know. So
Mhm.
one of the things that we've found is the consequence scanning works well at the very beginning of a project where or the very beginning of some sort of decision making where you have people from like different parts of the team. So, someone customer facing, someone from the tech side of things, someone from the project management side of things, and they all brainstorm together about what the risks could be. And one of the things that we found is hard for a lot of organizations is you can have an hour-long meeting, but how do you translate the outcome of that into what you actually do? And
Mhm.
that's the real challenge. So, Andy, I would definitely say come along to our webinar in a month's time and you'll hear how an organization did that where they were really worried because they know they need to do it on a lot of their projects. So they were like, right, how are we going to do this where it's not costing us loads and loads of time? It's very streamlined and works with our workflows. So that's exactly what they'll be talking about. For anybody else interested, also, we do a training session that's on consequence scanning called Introduction to Data Ethics and Responsible AI. It's on our website. And we are going to have a public instance of the course. We don't put them on all that often. So it's like a rare chance to have a public instance of the course where individuals can sign on. We do it as like group bookings for organizations, but I think it's in June. Maybe Joe can find the link. I don't know, Joe, if you can find it on the learning website while we're chatting here for Intro to Data Ethics, but it is bookable. So that would just train you how to do the consequence scanning. I'm going to ask, let's see, we've got time for maybe one more question. And I think it's a really interesting one to end on, sort of one we touched on before we talked. Um, should we be hopeful that poor critical engagement with the ethical issues might also result in poor commercial outcomes? That is, that there isn't an advantage to behaving unethically, or is there an advantage to behaving unethically? That is
So
like the elephant in the room, maybe.
yeah, yeah. No, that is such a good question. Uh, so I'm going to use the example of the Christmas ad for Coca-Cola, which went down terribly. It was AI generated creative. It in critical circles and in advertising circles, um, we all talked about how bad it was, how disappointing it was, etc. And then System One ran a measurement study on it to see how it went down with the general public. And wouldn't you know it, it was fine. If anything, it was the best one for a few years. So, not to say that these measurement studies are the be all and end all, but measurement will measurement is as much about smoke and mirrors as anything else. There'll always be ways that partners like Meta and Google will say, "Oh, look how much better your campaign did. That now you switched on whatever horrible black box thing you switched on that week." So I don't want to end on this note, but I don't trust that any numbers that we see that say things are improving commercially um, are really reflective of how people actually feel about them anyway. So it's a bit more complex than just saying like, you know with the Target one, for example, do we think that less people bought from Target because of that? It's about access, it's about price point. Like maybe not. Like people don't always act. People don't always spend their money in the most ethical way. They spend their money in the way that's the most accessible and the most helpful for them. So, um, yeah, there's a couple of different things going on there. Like, I don't trust the numbers that will come out, but also I don't trust people to actually do the right thing either.
Uh,
So someone said that they're a skeptic in the chat, and yeah, you're in good company.
Yeah, I think Ramey's made a good point. It's an important note to continue with, if not end on. So,
Yeah.
on that note, I wonder if you could just briefly put up that last slide if people would like to book a ticket for our next free webinar in a month's time. So this is the one where we'll be talking more about how they embedded that consequence scanning and the sort of like risk management into their workflows. So we also have another webinar coming up for public services and AI if anyone's interested in that one too. So the dates are there and the QR codes and the newsletter link. So we are at time. Laura, thank you so much. This has been really illuminating. We're all going to go click on that thing in Facebook now about why have I been
Why am I
given this
seeing this
ad?
ad? Yeah, click
Um,
it.
yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much. I think I everyone will join me in saying that was super interesting and we look forward to hearing more from you in future. So thank you so much.
Thank you for
And
having
thank
me.
you.
This was really fun. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.